And David of himself had a legal right to inherit hell as his portion. That's the legal right of every descendant of Adam. So how could David inherit God? David had no right to God. Unbelievers, those outside of Christ, cannot inherit God because they have no legal right. And I've given away the answer. The only way to have a right to worship God, a right to salvation, a right to the inheritance, is through Jesus Christ. Through Jesus Christ, the son of David, David was made a son of God, and sons have the right of inheritance. If sons, then heirs, says Paul in Romans 8. Through Christ's death and resurrection, David was made righteous. And according to God's just government, only the righteous can inherit. The unrighteous can't. And this is where Psalm 16, verses 8 through 11 come in. I've set the Lord before me. He's on my right hand. I won't be moved. My heart is glad. I'm going to dwell confidently in hope and security, because for my soul will be left in hell. Thine Holy One will not see corruption. God won't allow it. Instead, bringing the soul of the Holy One out of corruption, thou wilt show me the path of life, and I will drink of rivers of pleasures forevermore. And now we turn to Acts chapter 2. Acts 2, verse 25. Acts 2, verse 25. For David speaketh concerning him. And the previous verse is talking about Jesus Christ and God approved with miracles, signs and wonders. 3 words for the same thing. David speaketh concerning him, Christ. I, Christ, foresaw the Lord Jehovah, always before my face. He's on my right hand, that I should not be moved, and so on. And then after quoting the last 4 verses of Psalm 16, Peter proceeds to make an argument, do some exegesis of that quotation. Men and brethren, let me freely speak unto you of the patriarch David. That David, he's dead and buried, and his tomb's over there, and everybody knows where it is. Dead and buried. And yet this verse talks about someone who didn't see corruption. So David isn't speaking of himself. Therefore, verse 30, being a prophet, and since he knew that God had promised him that a physical descendant of his would be the Messiah to sit upon his throne, David, seeing this before, he's prophesying this 1,000 years before the resurrection of Christ, seeing this before spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul, Christ's soul, was not left in hell, neither his flesh, Christ's flesh, it didn't see corruption either. And this means that Jesus Christ, according to the inspired interpreter in Acts chapter 2, Jesus Christ is speaking in Psalm 16 verses 8 through 11. I, Christ, Psalm 16 verse 8. I have set the Lord before me. I won't be moved. I, Christ, am glad. I have hope. I dwell securely, because I know that though I'm going to the cross to be crucified for the sins of my people, I know that you will not, Lord, leave my soul in hell. I know that you will not suffer thine Holy One, me, the Messiah, to see corruption. Instead, thou wilt show me the path of life, and at thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. That's where I'm going. I'm not going to rot in the grave. I'm going into the path of life and to God's presence and fullness of joy. You see, David is a type of Jesus Christ as the King of Israel, the one who is the man after God's own heart, the servant of God, and he prophesies and writes here as Christ. And so, Psalm 16, the whole of it, is Christ's confession. Preserve me, O God, watch over me, for my 33 years on earth with all these wicked Pharisees trying to trip me up and tempt me. I trust in thee. He trusted in the Lord. Verse 2, Christ says, my soul has said to the Lord, thou art my Lord, my sovereign God. My goodness extendeth not to thee. Even Christ couldn't add to the blessedness of God. Never mind us, never mind merit, never mind conditions. Christ couldn't do it. What chance do you have when he was spotlessly holy? My goodness, my benefits extend, verse 3, to the saints that are on the earth, to the excellent, in whom is all my delight. I assume their nature. I assume their guilt. I assume their punishment. And in that way, I extend my goodness and the whole of my salvation to them. And I'm no idolater, says the Christ. I don't hasten after drink offerings of blood. I confess that all their sorrows shall be multiplied. And then verse 7, Christ says, I bless the Lord, who hath given me counsel. My reins instruct me in the night seasons. And this speaks of the inward, irresistible counsel of God, which Christ knew in his heart. Like the sweet inner teaching of Psalm 54, verse 13, we considered a couple of weeks ago, all thy children shall be taught of God. With the inward teaching of the Spirit, God woke Christ morning by morning to teach him the truth. He persevered in it all his days. I set the Lord always before me, verse 8. And here we think, for instance, of Christ setting his face to Jerusalem, steadfastly, resolutely, to the cross too. He never allowed himself to be deflected from his calling and duty, and said, for this reason came I into the world. So my heart's glad, because I know that you're not going to leave my soul in hell. I know I'm going to die, but I know you're not going to leave me in that tomb of Joseph of Arimatheus. You're not going to let me, thine Holy One, see corruption. My body won't decay. You will bring me out of the grave, because I am the resurrection and the life. Thou wilt show me the path of life, with pleasures forevermore, at thy right hand. So here we have the resurrection of Christ from the dead, and then his session at God's right hand on the throne, and the connecting link, so to speak, the ascension. All included in this word. So that Christ enjoys fullness of joy forevermore. And this is the joy, according to Hebrews 12, which was set before Christ, which enabled him to despise the shame of the cross, because he saw what was coming, and he reckoned that reward great enough incentive and reason to continue to suffer and die for our sins on the cross. Psalm 45 calls this the oil of gladness, which is poured out on Jesus Christ at God's right hand above all his companions as a reward for his great humiliation, his great exaltation. So Christ also confesses our text, and not only the whole of Psalm 16. Christ says, the lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places. Yea, I have a goodly heritage. A pleasant, beautiful, attractive, good heritage. And what does his inheritance consist of? Hebrews 1 verse 2 states, God hath appointed his Son heir of all things. Heir of all things. The entire universe of men and angels and animals and vegetation and oceans and everything else, God appoints Christ the heir of that, so that he inherits it. He inherits it with his exaltation. He inherits it with his exaltation so that he might rule over it. Psalm 2 speaks of this as well.